Good afternoon and welcome to our summer series webinar. We're so thrilled with the response we've had to this series of webinars at Vistage. We're hearing that this is something valuable for you all, and we will be keeping coming, bringing you some really interesting speakers for our webinar series. So today I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce Graham Morgan, who is known to many of you and certainly to us as a wonderful Vistage chair and important member of our community. Graham is a chair, a mentor, an advisor who truly does understand the ups and downs business owners and senior leaders face, and those of you in his two groups see that firsthand. That lived experience does give Graham a unique perspective and a real passion for helping leaders build the capability and resilience they need to achieve both short-term performance and long-term value for them and for their business. Graham brings to us more than 30 years' experience in senior leadership roles before establishing his own advisory business in 2013. So over his career as a leader, he's led complex transformations, navigating challenging relationships across private equity, banks, independent directors, and management teams. He has bought and sold numerous businesses end-to-end, played a key role in an IPO, and led organisations through highly demanding receivership situations. So that's the full spectrum, Graham. Graham is a graduate of the AICD, a certified chair with the Advisory Board Centre, and of course, a highly regarded and valued Vistage chair. Before we get started, yes, we are recording this session, and yes, Graham will be making the slides available to all of you afterwards. So with all of that introduction, it's my absolute pleasure, Graham Morgan, to introduce you and welcome you to our webinar today.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Stephanie, for dealing with all of the hygiene matters. As Stephanie said, when we get to the end, if you've had questions on the way, you put them through in the chat, we'll have time to address them afterwards. And I'll just get straight into it. Okay.
Graham, your notes are still showing.
Okay. Thank you.
So they can all see you had to write a note to say thank you, Stephanie. Lucky. Yeah, if you can just switch it.
Right.
Beautiful, you're good. Okay, we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Okay. As I mentioned, selling your business is a complicated thing, and there's a lot of aspects to it that you can think about. But one of the challenges is trying not to be too generic and trying to cover all of the aspects. And in order to be able to do that, I've thought that there's probably 5 key areas that we need to think about. The first aspect is, how do buyers really assess value? And this is where we're trying to think about it through the lens of how a buyer looks at your business rather than how you might look at it. So it's the outside in rather than the inside out. The second point is, what are some of the value drivers that matter most to somebody who's buying a business? There are a lot of aspects about what can count when you're buying a business, but which are the ones that value the most? The third, which is the opposite side of the coin, I guess, as to what adds value, is what are some of the mistakes and some of the issues that quietly can destroy the value? The fourth, which is always very helpful from a Vistage point of view, what are some of the practical steps that owners can take? And finally, you can't get rid of the fact that when somebody is selling their business, it is a stressful process. But preparation can make a lot of difference to how that actually reduces the stress. The irony of all of this is that most people optimize their businesses to run well for themselves. And why wouldn't they? Anybody who sets up a business knows that in the beginning, it really is only just you. And then you build your team and you build your business around you. And you get past the point of making enough money to make it sustainable. And then you get to the point where you are actually running that business so it suits you and it suits your lifestyle. But not unsurprisingly, a buyer looks at it the opposite way, and they're actually looking for businesses that run well without you. So this kind of gives us then 2 or 3 challenges. The first is, how do you build the value of a business? The second one is, how do you build it so that it is easily to be seen by other people? And then the third one is, how do you find the right kind of buyer that is going to pay for that business? So you'll see me talking quite a bit today about trying to look at it through the lens of a buyer. And from your point of view, you've got to make sure that the business isn't needed for you. One of my favorite business mentors is Warren Buffett, and he talks a lot about the power of compounding and what that can do in terms of investment and money. And I want you to try and think about the same concept, and we can do that in any aspect of our lives, whether it's our relationships, whether it's our business, or whether it's ourselves. And there is a lot of things that you need to get right before you sell a business. And a lot of them you can't fix right at the end. Buyers will see through things that have been prepared just for a sale. And what is critical is that you actually do the preparation and the work early enough. And some things just take time to sort out. So think about the power of compounding. And even if you're going to sell your business in 3 or 5 years' time, there are actions and things that you should be doing immediately. I'm going to step out of those 5 key areas that I mentioned before and just give you a bit of a feeling for where the market is at the moment, because it's important to put into context for the environment that you're operating in. You won't be surprised to know that the M&A market, just the whole Australian business market, is being very challenged at the minute, whether it's geopolitical issues, whether it's economic issues, whether it's shortage of labor, whether it's regulatory change. And this means that when people are buying businesses, they're increasingly looking for businesses that won't just add revenue or profit to their business. They're looking for businesses that will help them in their strategy. And so if you've got, for example, a business that knows that it needs to adopt AI, knows that it needs to do a digital transformation strategy, if it's buying a business and they happen to have got those things and have them in advance, then that's some of the strategic advantages that they can bring in. The sectors that are strong have typically been this strong for a while, whether that's IT, software, industrials, or healthcare. But the interesting thing, especially when there's a lot of uncertainty around, is that buyers are very interested in businesses that we might call boring or bread and butter, but that are churning out revenue and profit that is consistent over time. When we think about some of these key external challenges, and we just touched on them before, I just look at one of them in particular and take the technology and the AI disruption. Now, I know that's a common theme and people talk about it in all aspects of business life. And I know that it will be different depending on the sectors that you're in. But this is where it's important to start thinking ahead. And if you're thinking about selling your business in 3 or 5 years' time, try and think what it is that your business and your industry might look like once AI and digital transformation has happened. Because you need to start to think about that and have a plan for managing that as you get through to being prepared for your business to be sold. Somebody will ask you when they're looking into your business, what have you done on AI or business transformation? And you need to show to them not just that you've got a capability around it, but it's actually delivered some real results within your business. Against this external backdrop, there are some other challenges going on. And at the moment, I'm seeing a significant number of businesses where their revenue may well be in decline. They've got rising cost pressures. That therefore is impacting on margins. They may have supply chain challenges. There are businesses at the moment that have been disrupted massively by what Donald Trump has been doing in terms of tariffs. It's a tight labor market. People are still saying they can't get the right skills and the right experience they want, and that labor is still costing more than maybe what people would like. And there are constraints around growth capital. So when we're thinking about the kind of overall market, we've got to think of both the macroeconomic and also the microeconomic. So this all feels a bit depressing. So what can we actually do about it? I think some of the key areas to think about when you're looking ahead as to the things that you want to be building into your business is something that, whether you're selling your business or not, is always important, which is how are you increasing value within your organization, and how are you strategically addressing some of those challenges that we've just spoken about. Adaptability and flexibility is going to be critical. How flexible is your labor base? Is it all employees, and are they all based in Australia? Or have you actually managed to build a business model where you may have some offshore working, you may have contract working, and you can build some flexibility into your cost base? We touched on before innovation. I don't think anymore it can be just an add-on. I think it's something that we absolutely have to embrace and show that the whole business is creative and looking for improvements. And we have to keep a view on that long-term sustainability. We're going to talk, as we get into those 5 sections, about how you build value and how people look at it. But if you think about it simplistically, if somebody, for example, is going to be buying your business on, say, a 5 times multiple of your profit, they've got to be very comfortable that A, they're going to improve on your current performance, but B, that business is going to be around more than 5 years, just in order for them to make sure they get their money back. And then the final point on this slide, which is succession planning, which is so critical, whether you're selling your business or whether you're maintaining it. And succession planning isn't just about the owner, and there'll be more to talk about that in a moment. The other way to look at this is that, or the other facts that might be helpful, is that Grant Thornton every year come up with a deal tracker report. I think the next one's due out this April. And they have some interesting statistics in it that just give you a feel for the market itself. One of the ones that surprises me more than anything else is just how few businesses are sold in Australia every year. Some of the Vistage groups will recall when I've been speaking to them that I used to quote that it was under 1,000 businesses get sold in Australia every year. That number's closer to 1,500 now, but it has been in decline for the last 3 years. So there are less businesses being sold than there was in the years post-COVID. The good news about that is that 3/4 of advisors actually think that number is going to increase. But if you look at the long-term history, we haven't broken that 1,700 mark anyway. So whilst we might see an increase, it's not suddenly going to increase by thousands. The thing that I find interesting is that when you pick up the Fin Review or any other paper and you look at the company section and who's doing deals, it feels like either everybody's doing an IPO, though maybe less than it used to be, or they're being bought by private equity or that kind of a fund. But the interesting thing for me is that 90% of all acquisitions that occur are bought by another company. And I think this is important when we start to think about who might buy your business and who might pay the best price for your business. You ideally don't just want it to appeal to one group, but the one group you have to make sure it does appeal to is other companies, and particularly other people within your sector. I was in 2 minds whether to put this statistic up because it's not how it feels at the coalface. And so, according to the report, for businesses that have a valuation or sell for less than $20 million, the average multiple of EBITDA is 7 times. But all I would say is that it is typical that for business sales that are under 20 million, depending on the sector, but quite often that multiple can be more like 4 to 6 times rather than 7 times. So I put it in because it's factually correct, but it's skewed because of some of the industry sectors that may have much higher multiples. Okay, I'm going to take you through these 5 areas because I think these will be helpful to frame and to think about some of the topics that now come through. So when you go to prepare your business and you're showing it to other people, the one thing you do is you provide history. You'll provide, your financials, you provide your balance sheets, you'll provide information about the business in time, because that's typically all you can provide. But buyers aren't buying history, they're buying future cash flow. And in particular, what they're asking themselves is, how reliable has the income been? How predictable is it going to be going forward? And what risks am I assuming? And that third question is one that a lot of sellers don't think about. But when a buyer's looking at your business, they're not just looking at all of the positives, they're also considering all of the risks that could happen when they're buying the business. Keeping on this theme of how a buyer thinks, there's three kind of key points that I want you to consider. The first of all is earnings quality. And this is where probably everybody starts off, whether you're a buyer or a seller. And so what is the quality of the business, not just the actual number that's there? So this includes things like owner dependency. It will include things like customer concentration. For example, if a business has got a major client, or it's got any client that has more than 15% of the total revenue, then there is a concentration risk or issue. Now, that may not be a bad thing, it may not be a problem, but from a buyer's point of view, the minute they start to see that a business might be dependent on 2 or 3 clients, they are factoring in risk and issues to themselves. The second one is that we would look at is, what is the repeatability of that revenue? Isn't it the reason why businesses like Spotify and those kind of businesses do so well in terms of how they're valued, is it's not just that that the revenue is going to be consistent and come through every month, but they don't even have to send an invoice out to get that money. And so that is seen as something that's obviously very important. What is the margins? Are they under pressure? Is it a business that actually, if suddenly there was a change in the raw material price or there was supply chain issues, that would affect negatively the margin? So earnings quality is very important, and it's the first starting point. But if you go on to the point that we touched on previously, is that whilst it's almost like it's a dual thing that a buyer is looking at. On one hand, they are looking to see where the value lies in an organization, particularly when it comes for themselves. But at the same time, they are looking at risks and dependencies, because everything that they're taking on board, the only thing they can be sure of when they buy your business is that they're going to write a check. Everything else after that, they have to assume the risk as well as the reward. And so if we think about this, where does risk and dependency lie? First of all, there is owner dependency. How reliant on this business is it on the owner? Are you working in the business 5 days a week? Are you the person that generates most of the revenue? Is it dependent on you for critical things that go through? But dependency doesn't just sit with the owner. It also sits with the key staff. How many people are in the leadership team? What are the roles that they are doing? Is there some criticality around some of those things? So if there is a single point of failure, like, for example, you've got one senior person who is responsible for all new business that gets generated, they will be asking the same questions in terms of that dependency and risk as they would ask of yourselves. But it's not just about people. If we then think about systems and processes, and take any aspect of a business and say, for example, look at something like cybersecurity and ransomware. What are the policies? What is the organization doing to protect itself? What has it put in place? What is its emergency plan if they were to get attacked? What liabilities am I going to assume? And the same would go through in any kind of system or process. They'll want to understand, what is the rhythm of the business? What are the meetings that happen? What are the structures? What are those processes? And if you think of it another way, when you think like a franchisor or a franchise business, when somebody buys a franchisee buys an outlet, they are buying the whole system that will operate. And they will get a business in a box that they will then just follow through the processes and the systems and the structures. And so how close is your business to being able to do that for somebody who's going to be buying it? The other factor to think about with risk and dependency is that whilst they're going through this process, they're also evaluating that risk in terms of a financial situation. Excuse me. And so let's just say, for example, your business is in a multiple range of 4 to 6 times its profit. 6 times being the best they would pay for the highest quality business and 4 being the lowest. If they start to see risks and issues, maybe your customer concentration is too high, maybe there's some dependency on some key people, maybe they've got some concerns with the quality of those earnings, then that 6 times multiple will start to drift in their mind down to a 5 times or lower. The second thing they might do is to say, okay, well, I'm comfortable that this business is going to be a 5 times and it's going to be, for argument's sake, worth $10 million. But then they might say, but I can see some storm clouds ahead, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to navigate them. And I might have to invest some money to make sure that the business delivers its promise. In which case they may say, I'll still pay $10 million, but I'm going to hold $3 million of that back, and I'll give it you in a year. And in the meantime, that means I can use that $3 million of cash for things that I might be concerned about in the business. If you take that thinking a stage further and they are even more worried, then they get to the stage of saying, well, okay, I know you want $10 million, but I'm really not sure that it's fully worth that, because there are some issues here that I'm not sure you've addressed and I can't get comfortable with in due diligence. So you can potentially still earn $10 million, but actually I'm only going to pay you $6 million when I buy your business. And then for the next 2 years, there's going to be an additional $2 million that you can earn, but it will be based upon the business hitting certain performance hurdles, which could be revenue or profit or retention. And by the way, I need you to hang around for those 2 years to make sure that happens. And can you see how that, from being a business where they're very comfortable and confident, they've then gone through a stage of reducing and changing the offer as to what you might find acceptable. And often when you see buyers putting those kind of things in terms of their offer, it's because they've got risks and dependencies that they're not comfortable with have been managed. And then the final lens to think about with a buyer, and they may not say this to you, but all the time they're looking about how easy is this going to be to transfer across to me? You know, they might be in the position that they want to run the business, in which case they might be thinking, is this something that I think I can easily take on and I can manage? Or they might even be looking to employ somebody else and put them into your business. Or they may have a manager already that's pretty busy and they're going to be checking that out too. So when a buyer's looking at your business, your initial conversations will be about earnings quality and about the future and about the profitability and about your customers and your suppliers. But don't forget that at the same time, they're also starting to evaluate the risk and dependency and also how easy is this to move across. Buyers don't ask, how hard did you work to build this? They're much more interested in asking, how hard will this be for them to own? So now coming on to the second of these areas, and what are some of the value drivers that people value most? And again, this is one of those areas that is specific for every business, but there are some areas that people consider the most, and there's 5 in particular. So the first one is repeatability and predictability, and we've touched on some of these things before. And if you take something like the financials, how predictable has that revenue and profitability been over the last 3 years? And there's 2 ways that they can kind of look at that. They can look at it as a year on year, and they can see whether the business has been growing and whether it's been consistent. But the other thing that people will look for, particularly if you're trying to tell them that there's a positive future ahead and you're giving them a future forecast, is how good is the business at forecasting? And the only way you can do this is by being able to show them not just the last 3 years financials, but the last 3 years' budgets that were done at the beginning of those years and how the business has performed against those budgets, and to show what that accuracy can be. And so if you're wanting somebody to factor in your forecast as to how much the business is going to grow, you also need to demonstrate to them how good you've been at forecasting in the past. The repeatability of revenue we've touched on before. And the other thing is that buyers love boring businesses. So the more predictable it can be, the better it is. Management depth, another way of looking at succession planning. They're not just looking at you and what might happen, though they will do, if something happened to you dramatically and you got knocked down by a bus. But when a buyer buys your business, in the main, they know you're not going to be part of it anyway. Whether you stay for a year or you 2, or you might be part of an earnout, they know at some point either you're not going to want to stay or they don't want you to hang around. And so the management depth is actually about everybody else in the business, not just you. And so if we look at the people underneath you, which ones of them have got the opportunity to be promoted to be a general manager or a CEO? And if you've identified those issues and opportunities, what are you doing to develop them and fast track their learning? And then they'll look underneath them and see what is the depth of talent underneath and how is all of that being nurtured. And a bit like we touched on in the previous point about forecast accuracy and about being able to go back in time, you can't suddenly make these things up when you actually get into a process, because what a buyer will want to look for is evidence and proof that you've really thought about leadership in the business and about management depth, and that there is training and development, not just KPIs and annual reviews. Another way of thinking about this is, if you were to be removed from your business for 90 days, how would the business perform? Would it wobble and stumble, or would it actually thrive when you're not there? And it is the point of, on a daily basis, what might get missed, then it's on a weekly and a monthly. But the key thing to show whether or not you've really managed to get your team to grow and to step yourself out of the business is, if you were out of the business for 90 days, would A, the strategy that had been set still be executed? And B, if there was a wobble in that strategy and something didn't happen, would the leadership team be able to take hold of that and redress the strategy and to rebuild the next quarter's view? Customer quality. People talk quite a lot about how important it is or it isn't that customers are contracted. As we all know, any customer contract, particularly with large organizations, always has clauses in of change of control. And so, the customer still retains the power to cancel a contract if they don't like the new buyer. But the reality is that's very rare. And a contract does show that there's a commitment and a loyalty between the two companies. But the main thing that people will look for in customer quality is, what's the depth of the relationship? Are they good payers? Are they good to work with? Is there a close relationship there with the business? As well as, what is the spread and how much risk is on any potential client? Systems and data. People want to see a well-run business. And this goes back to that point that we talked about in terms of the transition. And how easy is it going to be for us to adapt that business? For all you know, the buyer might be a serial acquirer, and they may want to, on the day that they take you over or within the first 3 months, take you out of your systems and put you onto theirs. It still doesn't take away the fact that people want to see that there is a discipline and an approach as to how people use systems and how well they use the data within it. And then the final point of things that buyers look for, and this is really where they start to see the icing on the cake, hopefully, is that you might well have a very well-run business, but if you can show them that you've reviewed your industry, you understand what it takes to be a top performer, and that you've built strategies and plans to actually take the business to outperform your sector, not only will it show that you've got a really good leadership team and a really good process, but you might well be giving them some answers to some problems they've got. And once you've actually got that, then that's like gold dust, because then they're going to be much more interested in acquiring you, because then they can actually get additional synergies apart from the ones that are obvious. Okay, on to the third one, which is the flip of what builds value, what can actually destroy value. And there's four ways to kind of think and consider about this. The first one, which is one that we all know, that old problem of procrastination, and I'll fix that later. As we touched on before, some of the things you've got to do to improve your business take a lot of time, and you can't fix them at the end. If you've got issues with your financials, then you can't sort those out overnight. You can start addressing them overnight, but you can't fix them overnight. Which that kind of brings me on to this over-reliance on adjustments. If I spoke to my team and said, what is the one thing that frustrates them more than anything else, or they find challenging more than anything else, it's having to make lots of adjustments for the way that the business might be run. Now, we know small businesses and medium-sized business, any private business, will structure itself as effectively as it can to manage its tax obligations and to maximize the returns for the owner. But you're starting to have an issue when sometimes you can be asked to make more adjustments to the P&L than the actual profit that's showing on it. Think about this, though, through the eyes of a buyer. If a buyer's looking at a business and it's say the stated profit is $1 million, and with normalizations, the seller's saying that actually there's $100,000 of adjustments that I need to make, and so really the profit would be 1.1 million. Most buyers would look at that pretty reasonably and think, okay, well, there's probably some logic behind this, and go into it with an open mind. If you take the same business and you said that the profit is $500,000 and there's 600,000 of adjustments, so i.e. still the same 1.1 million, that buyer, even before you start to explain what those $600,000 worth of adjustments are, is already playing a story in their mind, which is, I'm not even going to pay for half of those. And that's how they'll start to think about it. So I understand why people run their businesses a certain way. But if you think you're selling your business, going to be selling your business for 3 or 5 years, I would recommend that you start to tidy up what are those normalizations that really should be accounted for properly within the P&L and balance sheet. Owner is a hero model. I think we all know what this one is. If you are currently in your business 5 days a week, 48 weeks a year, and you've got key roles within the business, whether that be finding the revenue, keeping the revenue, managing the top clients, if you're the only person doing some of those things, then that has got risk written all over it for a buyer. And the other lens I would put on that is, if you're not selling your business and you intend that you want to work, until you're well past retirement age and you want to then, hand it over to somebody within your family, why would you not want to be able to create some more time for yourself? And the other thing is, it's not actually doing your business or your team any good. If you think about it this way, and I think that, we've talked, think of James Clear and Atomic Habits, and think about sometimes how you can do some habit stacking. If you were to, for example, do something like, say, I'm only going to be in the business 4 days a week, but on that 5th day, I'm actually going to start to work through my financials and start to tidy them up. I'm going to get myself educated. I'm going to learn how to read balance sheets really well so that I can think about how I bring that into my business. I'm going to do some work to improve my cost of goods or my cost of labor, and actually start to work on some of those things. Not only are you showing that the business isn't dependent on you, not only are you letting your leadership team run the business, but you're also actually fixing some things that would increase the value of the business when you come to sell it. And then the final point that people get wrong is that they ignore the emotional side of selling a business. It's not that there isn't an emotional side, there absolutely is. For lots of people, when it comes time to sell a business, it's probably one of the most significant things they've ever done in their lives, outside of getting married and having children, or buying a home. And in some cases, it can mean even more than that. So you need to start to think through what are the things that I'm emotionally attached to, and try and split away some of those and actually be prepared for it. So what are some of the practical steps that owners can take now, even years out? I like to think about this in terms of a pillar and strength. So you're probably doing you're doing a lot of things right. And if the last 10 minutes has all sounded a bit negative and these are all the things that people aren't doing right, there'll be lots of things that you are doing right. So what can you do to kind of strengthen your position? The first one I would say is run an exercise where you actually spend a day or a couple of days just thinking like a buyer. Most businesses do strategic reviews. And what I would suggest is that maybe at the next one that you do, run the lens as if you were about to buy your business and start to ask yourself some critical questions. Start off with, if I was buying this business today, what would worry me? And just sit with that question. And just think about what in your business would worry you if you were to have to write a check to buy it. What questions would you then ask of yourself if you're trying to get comfort around some of those areas? What things don't look quite right that you'd want to know? And this is a really key question that people, again, that a buyer would think of. What risks would I price? So buying any business has risks, but what would a buyer put a price against and therefore deduct the price? Because that's probably a good starter for some of the things that you need to look at. And so those of you that are Vistage members, and there'll probably be a number of you on today's call, you have an added advantage. Speak to your chair and see whether or not you can't take this to the group. And it would be a great exercise for the group to do as well, and get them to think like a buyer, and you present your business and let them challenge your business. In lots of ways in life, building optionality is helpful. And start to think that through on a variety of lenses. Take the customer concentration area that we spoke about before. You may have had a significant customer that's been with your business for 20 years, and as far as you're concerned, could be with the organization for another 20 years. You're not going to do anything about reducing the amount that you do with that client, because there's obviously good financial reasons why not. But what are you doing to actually kind of dilute it? And it doesn't just have to be, other people in the same sectors. Are there other products and services or other markets that you can actually give yourself some optionality around? I touched on people before, and there's even an extra layer now than there used to be. So in terms of people, you've obviously got your core team. What are you doing in terms of offshore resourcing? What are you doing in terms of contracted support, labor? What are you doing in terms of AI and agents? What flexibility and optionality are you building into the people side? Suppliers is a really good example. And I had one of my Vistage members who suffered from this directly. If your business is supplying out of China into a single market, and in her case it was America, then you will know what kind of happened next, which is that the tariffs and Donald Trump could have put a complete torpedo through. And she's had to pivot, and now it's got a business coming out of Europe in a completely different distribution model. But what can you do with your suppliers to give you optionality? If we remember back to COVID, those of you who were getting supply from overseas had to then start to look about, well, what secondary supply base could I have out of Australia? And I know because of margin pressure, a number of people have gone away from that and gone back to single sourcing again. But think of it through the lens of a buyer. There's a lot of risk if you've got single sources of supply. And yourself, what little shifts can you make that will start to show that the business isn't so reliant on you? And if your business isn't ready yet for you to be out of the business for 90 days, I understand that, because a lot of businesses aren't. But what can you do so that you're only in the business 4 days a week? And then the 4 days a week could be that you're going to take 5 days off a month. And then it could be that you're going to be going overseas for 4 weeks at a time. Start to think about those little shifts that you can do, and what jobs that you do could you give to somebody else. I've touched on this a few times. If you do nothing else, tidy up your reporting. Make sure that your financials are clean. Make sure that they make sense. Make sure that there is a monthly discipline of reviewing them. Get rid of surprises, and make sure that the narrative matches the numbers. going back to Warren Buffett, he said once that, whereas lots of people like P&Ls and everything else, and that's all fine. Of course, you need to understand them. P&Ls don't give you the full picture. And he would personally rather read 8 to 10 years worth of balance sheets before he even looks at a P&L, because balance sheets will tell you the story and the history of a business. And if you imagine that somebody like Warren Buffett was interested in investing in your business or buying your business, and he's done that kind of work before he even meets you, will your narrative about your business match what his view is of your numbers? Single point dependencies, we've talked a lot about what's within your business. Think about, while you're preparing your business, whilst it's probable that another company like yours will be the buyer, try and give yourself some optionality around this. And if your business would also be attractive to somebody who just wants to buy a business to run it as a standalone, or whether or not it could be a target for private equity to do some form of a roll up, if you've got those optionalities, then obviously do it. If you can buy a business that multiple people want, then obviously it gives you more chances of success. So think about these areas as things that you can do that will strengthen your position. And the fifth area I just want to touch on now is this piece about preparation reduces stress. So prepared businesses sell better, they sell faster, they sell with fewer reductions, and owners feel more in control. And I think probably most people would understand all of those things, but it is true. As one of my team says, when you go into due diligence, that's 2 months of your life that you'll never get back. And that is correct. But if you've done all of the things that we've talked about today, you'll go into it in a lot more control. But it isn't just about the business and the financials and getting a deal done. Nearly every business owner I know cares deeply about their business. They care about their people, they care about their suppliers, they care about their customers. And so what's really important is that you've got to protect your legacy. And if you go into this not prepared and you haven't done the hard work beforehand, then you are risking all of those things when you hand it to somebody else. Why would you assume that they can do as good a job as you, or even better? For all you know, you might be selling to somebody who can't run a business as well as you. And so you need to give it to them in the best possible shape that you can. So just coming towards the end now, if I go back to the beginning, we talked about how most business owners run the business to run well for themselves. And what I'm asking you to do is to think about that, how buyers look at your business, and they're looking for a business that runs well without you. The 5 areas that we touched on is, how do buyers really assess value? What are some of the value drivers that matter the most? Then some of those mistakes that we want to try and avoid, some practical steps that you can take. And when we think back to those, it's not that you necessarily have to do all of them, but there will be some of them there that absolutely are suitable and appropriate for you to do. And then the preparation reduces stress. If you're going to sell your business in 2 years' time, it is honestly, you want to start doing some work on it now. You want to start doing some work on it this week. And so that's it. I hope that was useful for you. I think if you're thinking about some of the key things to think about, it really is about that preparedness. It's about doing the work now. But most importantly, try and look at your business through the lens of a buyer rather than the lens of somebody who's known that business has been operating it for 20 years. Okay, I might stop sharing now, Steph.
Brian, that was really good. It was so straightforward and clear, and I really liked it. There were a couple of things that came to mind. And one is, well, the big one for me was emotion, that a buyer isn't thinking, Graham's been doing this for 20 years and he set it up and he mortgaged his house to do it, and it's not part of the equation from the buyer. How hard do you find it is to shift someone selling their business away from that mindset? This is my life, this is my baby. How hard is it for you to shift their mindset when they're selling?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I think that, again, there is no generic answer. Part of the generic would be that if they've done all of the right things and they've run their business well and they're not actively involved in it every day, then it's easier because they've actually got things outside of their business that they can relate to. I mean, if you think about somebody who works 5 days a week in their business, they may well have weekends that dictated by family life and may have structures around that. So they don't actually have a structure outside of their company. And if you suddenly take that away, then that's where a lot of that emotion can happen. Whereas if they're only coming into the office 2 days a week and the team are managing most of the day to day, it is easier. But it still doesn't get rid of some of that emotion. And I think the point that you were making as well is even if they can't unpack that, you need to try and get a business owner to think about how the buyer will look at it. And it's not that they're not sympathetic, but whilst an owner might be looking at it thinking, look at all the hard work I've done, and this has been my life story, they're looking at it going, I'm about to write a big check, and where are all the risks in this for me? And what is this going to do to my life and my work week?
Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you. We have some questions here. There was a straightforward one right at the beginning, which was about when you say sub 20 million, did you mean EBITDA or revenue?
It was actually neither of those two. It was the value of the transaction. So somebody's prepared to write a check for up to 20 million. That was the multiple.
Yeah, got it. Thank you for clarifying that. So from Adem, what are the unique priorities when selling a professional services business, for example, consulting services?
Yeah. Well, those are hard, right, in some ways because they're not manufacturing something. There isn't machines and widgets and things that pop out the other end. But a lot of those points that I talked about are still critically correct. So if you look at consulting or advisory businesses, how much of their revenue is recurring and retained and probable, understanding that any agreement could be cancelled. But if a consulting business has had a certain client for the last 2.5 years and they pay them monthly, if there's no contract that says it's going to end, providing they're offering services, there's a probability that's going to continue. Whereas you get other consultants where it might be very project based, in which case what you're then looking at is, well, how good are they at getting the right volume of contracts at the top of the funnel, and how good are they at converting them? And so it isn't that, I mean, in a perfect world, everybody would prefer retained revenue that's regular and consistent. But if you are in a project-based world, you just need to show that you've got a process for how you're going to bring in that revenue and show that area of predictability.
Thank you. Really interesting. While we're still going through questions, Sandy Haythorne, could you pop the date of the next webinar into the chat, please, if you're available to do that? We've got a question here from David. Is there a number of revenue lines or client numbers that buyers look for? Is it the more the better, or keep it tight?
Yeah, great question. I think that's a yes and answer.
Yeah.
So if I describe the two extremes, most people would agree that once you get past 15% of revenue with one customer, that starts to have risk around it. And if you go to the extreme, we did sell a business once where they had one client, which was 100% of the revenue. And so that has got risk written all across it. So I think most buyers would be very nervous of obviously that kind of extreme concentration. But if you go to the other extreme, people don't want 1 million customers unless you've got very, very slick systems, which means that you don't touch them. And so you can't just look at revenue without looking at the industry and also the processes and systems. But if you're looking for most of the businesses that's probably listening to this today, most of us would say that if you can have a nice diversified revenue base where you might have 20 clients and on average they're all 5% of your revenue, or you've got 50 clients and they're all 2% of your revenue, those kind of numbers start to feel pretty comfortable. But as people like Amazon and Spotify have proved, you can have hundreds of millions of people, and that's fine too.
Yeah, well, that's right. We still have some time if you would like to pop a question in the chat or the Q&A. Sandy's put up, it is the role of purpose with Lincoln Elliott, who's one of our newest chairs in WA. Really interesting. person, and he's talking about the role of purpose in the AI world. And that's on the 24th of February. So that's the next. We're having quite the summer this year, lots of wonderful webinars. Will the recording be shared? Yes, Robert, absolutely. We will share the recording and the slides. I think this is something that you would want to go back to and listen more. And while we're doing this, Graham, I think it's time we do another podcast as well. I think it's so interesting and so relevant for so many of our members. I love your message about now's the time to think about this, not when you're saying, I'm going to sell today.
I think that's a good point. And one of the saddest things for me is that when we might be talking to a prospective client and we have that initial conversation, and therefore by default, they're obviously thinking that they want to sell their business at some point. And when we get the response back saying, actually, I think, what you're offering is great and I like your services and I think your people are wonderful, but I think I'm going to wait a year. I don't think we're ready for it yet. You've obviously got to respect the decision, and we'd be more than happy to talk to them in a year, but you always know in your heart that that's a mistake. Because the other thing that we haven't factored in today is unexpected things happen to us all, whether that's our health or somebody else's health, or COVID happens, or a GFC happens. Things happen that none of us were planning for. And if you're well prepared, even if you haven't started the process, it just puts you in a much better position to be able to scramble quickly and get into a process. Whereas if you've left it all and you haven't actually started to tidy these things up, you can't tidy them up quickly enough.
Yes, absolutely. So here's one from Lachlan. How do you manage expectations with buyers and sellers, as generally only larger deal multiples are published, causing me to naturally overvalue my business? I thought it when you said it. It's like selling your house, isn't it? Oh, I heard of one across the road that sold for 10 million, therefore mine must be worth 12. So how do you manage that?
Same methodology, but slightly different, maybe slightly different conversations. So first of all, that you can get all of the multiples, and there's a variety of ways that advisors will get as many deals as they can within a sector. And they'll look at those both domestically and abroad. They'll obviously look at the quality of the business, but what they will have to do is to do a factoring down of the multiples that are public to bring them back in relation to the size of the business that's there. So if the average multiples they're seeing in the public knowledge sector, might be $50 to $100 million worth of purchase price. If your business is likely to be more like the 10, they will take it down quite significantly. So that's the maths, and that's the skill set that they've got, and that's how they do it. The second thing is there will be some general rules of thumb that small, medium-sized businesses kind of run to that we obviously know because we're buying and selling companies. So you get to know what some of those are. But the key thing is, I think with the seller, I think there's 2 or 3 conversations you've got to have. The first of all, as their advisor, we should give them our view as to what we think their business is sensibly worth. But there is a part of this that has to come from the business owner themselves, which is what do they believe it's worth? And actually, more importantly, what is their kind of walk away number? Because it's not just about the money. Some people want to retire. Some people might want to go on to something else. And so as an advisor, we obviously want to get them the very best price that we can, but there also might have to be some realism here. So that's the beginning of it. When we're talking to a buyer for a business, ideally they will tell us, if they're an experienced buyer, they're normally pretty good because they already know what the kind of prices that they've paid before and what they're likely to pay. But if they're inexperienced and they look for guidance, we will typically share with them our view of what we thought the business would probably be worth in the beginning, albeit maybe in a range, and try and help them to understand why our view is that. But it's a really good question. And I can't think of a single deal where it hasn't caused some interesting conversations.
Well, that's the experience in the advisory. I think we will leave it there today. There was a quote that you said that was fabulous. Someone's just even written it to me and said, I love this quote. Preparation reduces stress and protects legacy. Yeah. And how powerful is that for you speaking directly to people who have built a business and looking to move the business to the next chapter and, of course, themselves. Graham, that was so interesting. Thank you very much for joining us today and for giving us all your time. It was a great session, and look forward to seeing you all very soon with Lincoln Elliott on the 24th of February. Have a great rest of week. Graham Morgan, thank you again.